Hey, Saturday morning, and today a special one. I'm not recording from home this morning. I'm sitting in the grounds of my school on the basketball court. Like, just came off the court, played with the current girls' team. Sweat still drying on my face. This glow in my chest that I hadn't felt in a very long time. This building, my school, hasn't changed much. And in architecture, when we say a structure is truly sustainable, we mean it's rooted, deep, still becoming more itself, stronger with time, with pressure, with memory. Like gilli mitti ki khushbu आई suddenly as it drizzled a little. That smell, that old stone, familiar corridors, still alive. And then, as we walked off the court, one of the girls said something that just stopped me. She said, "The way I feel safe, powerful, ambitious inside this school, I've never felt that in any other space I go." That line, that's why I am here today. Today, I'm choosing to be the audience. I'm sitting with my notes, my sketches, my half finished thoughts scribbled on the margins, and I'm handing them over to my virtual agents to read them back to me, to hear what I sound like from the outside, to be the observer of my own ideas for once. There's a concept in architecture, Loris Malaguzzi named it the third teacher. Not your parent, not your professor, the environment itself, the building, the quality of a ceiling, the corridor that made you run, the window that you stared out of when you were supposed to be solving for X. I didn't have that vocabulary when I was 15, but I felt it. So yeah, this is Architects FM Voice Notes with Kashish, एक सफर दिल्ली से दिल तक, and we are inside building one of the mixed land use series, schools and institutes. And today, it's a talk about what the building itself was teaching us before any curriculum, before any grade, before anyone even asked us to sit down. Bringing to you episode 11, The Building, Third Teacher. So, yeah, let's walk through those corridors again.
Think about the last time you walked into a hospital waiting room, like you probably felt this subtle, almost this creeping exhaustion before you even sat down.
Oh, absolutely. It's like the air itself in there is just heavy.
Right, exactly. Now, I want you to think about your favorite local coffee shop or like a bakery.
Yeah, your shoulders instantly drop 2 inches the moment you cross the threshold.
Exactly. We casually call that a vibe, right?
Right.
But architects, they call it a weapon or, well, a highly deliberate tool.
It's a visceral biological reaction, honestly. I mean, we process physical environments on a subconscious level long before our rational brain catches up.
Yeah, way before.
The lighting, the acoustics, the spatial proportions, they are actively manipulating your nervous system.
And that manipulation, or I guess the deeply intentional design, that is our absolute obsession for today's deep dive.
We have some incredibly fascinating source material today, don't we?
We really do. We've got our hands on this stack of personal notes, portfolio sketches, and unreleased audio transcripts from an architect named Kashish.
Right. She's documenting her professional and personal evolution through this audio series called Architects FM.
Yeah, but the thing is, she isn't just talking about pouring concrete or like passing zoning laws. It's so much deeper than that.
Far from it, yeah. Our mission today is to unpack her framework of what she calls emotional architecture.
Which is such a brilliant term.
It really is. We're going to explore how this whole idea of mixed land use is shaped up, how it acts as a psychological map of our daily lives.
Right.
And most importantly, we're going to culminate in this profound concept of how a series of school buildings to begin with, how that whole space acts as a child's third teacher.
I really want to start from the ground up with that idea of mixed land use because, my initial reaction to that phrase was pretty clinical.
Oh, sure. It sounds like a city planning seminar.
Exactly. When I hear mixed land use, my brain immediately conjures up a dry city council meeting. Color-coded maps, commercial real estate on the ground floor, apartments stacked on top.
But Kashish completely subverts that, doesn't she?
Yeah. She totally does. She uses it as a blueprint for the human experience itself. She actually divides her own architectural portfolio into these distinct emotional zones.
Yeah, she reorganizes those traditional architectural categories based entirely on psychological function rather than just structural form.
Which makes so much more sense when you think about how we actually live.
Right. So in her notes, she has this primary category labeled residence/sanctuary. And under this umbrella, she includes projects from her bachelor's and master's degrees.
Like the dream house and the circular housing community.
Exactly. And also a project she titles Urban Fabric CP. She groups these together because they share the exact same fundamental requirement.
Which is that they absolutely must lower the occupant's psychological defenses.
Precisely. They have to provide genuine sanctuary. And she sharply contrasts this with another category she calls workplaces and commute hubs.
And the contrast between those two specific zones in her personal life right now is just staggering.
It sounds exhausting, to be honest.
It really is. We get a real unfiltered glimpse into her day-to-day reality in these audio transcripts, and she is in the absolute thick of the professional grind.
Yeah, what was it, 6 days a week?
6 days a week, 9 hours a day. She says she's running on 3 hours of creative sleep and 6 hours of grueling site coordination.
Wow.
I know. Her calendar basically reads like a tightly packed site plan where every single square meter is already allocated, you know?
Translating the concept of a crowded architectural site plan into a description of burnout is, well, it's incredibly perceptive of her.
It really paints a picture.
It shows how completely her environment dictates her internal state.
It really made me think about the space between the sanctuary and the workplace, you know, like the commute.
Oh, the transition zone.
Yeah, because if you are traveling from a place of deep rest to a place of intense high-stakes coordination, that transit time isn't just empty minutes on a clock.
Not at all.
I was mulling this over, and it feels like an architectural airlock, like in a deep-sea submarine.
Oh, I like that analogy.
You need that transitional decompression zone between the safety of the vessel and the crushing pressure of the ocean. The commute is literally the airlock between home and the office.
Let's look at the friction inside that airlock, though, because, well, it's rarely a smooth decompression.
Right. Usually it's terrible.
Yeah, and Kashish is incredibly candid about this in her notes.
Mm.
She admits she hasn't actually experienced quote-unquote great workplace architecture yet.
Which is fair for someone early in their career.
Exactly. So she is still exploring the impact of emotional architecture in a corporate culture, but she knows the commute intimately.
Yeah, she explicitly writes about how traveling the metro twice a day leaves this massive psychological imprint.
And we really have to consider the mechanism of how that happens.
Right, because it's not just about getting from point A to point B. I mean, the journey is actively shaping your mental state before you even arrive.
Well, think about it. The metro is a highly engineered environment that often it strips away human agency.
Oh, completely.
Think about the sensory inputs. You've got harsh fluorescent lighting that totally disrupts your circadian rhythm, the unpredictable jolts of the train,
Yeah.
the forced physical proximity to strangers invading your personal space.
Yeah, someone's backpack just pressed right into your shoulder.
Right. Your brain is constantly processing these micro threats. Cortisol spikes.
Yeah.
By the time you swipe your badge at the office, your nervous system is already in a mild state of fight or flight.
That makes so much sense. Kashish recognizes that the spaces we move through dictate our emotional baseline just as much as our final destination.
Absolutely.
I was reading her notes on this brutal vendor meeting from a teaser episode she calls the Edge episode, or BTS behind the site. And honestly, I got totally lost for a second.
Ooh, how so?
Well, she takes this concept of physical space and suddenly untethers it entirely. She overhears these external consultants and vendors calling her an asset.
Right. They say she is indispensable.
Yeah, but she is so exhausted she can barely process the compliment. But then she writes, and this blew me away. She writes, "Your work, the invisible work, the consistent work, it becomes a space. And spaces communicate even when their architect is silent."
That is such a powerful realization.
But how does invisible hard work physically build a space? I was hoping you could unpack that.
Sure. I mean, it requires looking at architecture not as physical shelter, but as structural support.
Okay, structural support.
Right. When you consistently show up, solve problems, and manage crises, especially in a chaotic environment like a construction site, you build trust. And that trust becomes a structural element.
So it's not just a vibe.
No, think of a reputation not as some vague aura, but as a load-bearing wall.
Okay, a load-bearing wall. Keep going with that. I love that.
Well, when a building is finished and the drywall is painted, you don't see the load-bearing wall anymore, right? It's completely invisible in the daily routine.
You just walk right past it.
Exactly. But when a massive storm hits or a high-pressure project threatens to collapse the team, that invisible wall is the only thing keeping the roof from caving in.
Wow.
By doing the invisible, exhausting work day after day, Kashish constructed a professional structure so robust that external vendors recognized it as a shelter. They felt secure relying on her. Her reputation literally became an emotional architecture for others to lean on.
That makes so much sense. It's the invisible structure that dictates how people behave when they enter your professional orbit.
Precisely.
But she doesn't just leave this theory at the construction site, does she? She applies this invisible architecture to her personal life, and the sources get wonderfully intimate here.
They really do. She describes a gathering on a random weekday night.
Yeah, it's like 11 p.m. She's in a living room with her mother's friend, Shikadi Pooja, and a few others.
A very specific demographic, honestly.
Yeah.
A room entirely composed of women.
Yes, surrounded by what she explicitly calls a specific kind of female energy. They have warm food, there's laughter, there's absolutely no agenda.
Just existing together.
Yeah. And she notes that the physical dimensions of the living room haven't changed a single millimeter. The drywall is the same. The ceiling height is the same. But the emotional architecture of the room has completely transformed.
And we have to unpack the psychology of why that transformation occurs. Human beings are deeply social primates, you know.
Right.
When we are in an environment where we feel truly seen, validated, and safe among trusted peers, our autonomic nervous system shifts.
Shifts how? Like physically?
Yes, it shifts out of that vigilant sympathetic state we mentioned during the commute and into a parasympathetic state. Rest and digest.
So the physical walls actually feel different to her brain.
Exactly. Because her hypervigilance is turned off, the perceived boundaries of the room literally soften. The harsh edges of the day dissolve.
That's incredible.
The laughter and the shared energy act as acoustic and emotional insulation against the outside world. She didn't need to rebuild the living room to create a sanctuary. The people inside it provided the psychological shelter.
Man, if the simple living room can be that profoundly transformative for an adult whose brain is already fully developed, I mean, what does this mean for the foundational buildings we place our children in?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because adults have the agency to leave a bad space. If a coffee shop is too loud, I just walk out. But kids are completely captive to the physical structures we put them in.
And this brings us to the absolute core of Kashish's thesis. This is where her exploration of mixed land use and emotional architecture finds its highest stakes.
A third teacher concept.
Yes. We are looking at the concept of the school building as the third teacher and asking, what is the real emotional architecture from a child's lens?
I was completely fascinated by this part of the deep dive, because if parents are the first teachers and the human educators in the classroom are the second, then the building itself is actively educating the child every single day.
It is dictating the terms of their reality. A building teaches a child about power dynamics, about their own value, and about whether the world is fundamentally safe or hostile.
It's a huge responsibility.
It really is. And Kashish examines this massive responsibility through three distinct chronological lenses in her life.
Right. I want to break these down because they're brilliant. Starting with the first lens, which she labels the child me. She specifically reflects on how she felt as a child at a school she refers to as Oxford.
Right.
When an architect looks backward at their own childhood spaces, what are they actually seeing?
They are analyzing scale and proportion. To a small child, a standard institutional building can feel incredibly oppressive.
Because everything is just so big.
Yes. If the door handles are too high, if the windows are placed so only adults can look out of them, if the hallways are massive, echoing tunnels, the building is constantly whispering to the child.
Whispering what?
It's saying, you are small, you do not have power here, you must conform to the adult world. A child doesn't know the architectural term for that, obviously.
Yeah.
But their stomach registers the anxiety.
Yeah.
The building is teaching them to shrink.
Wow. The building is teaching them to shrink. That is haunting.
It is.
From there, she shifts into the second lens, right? The present architect me. This is heavily rooted in her formal training and her master's thesis.
Yes. Her notes detail her work designing a special school for specially abled kids.
Right, and she references specific sites, projects, or firms' names like Alpine, Octaga, and Vishal Sur's office. Why does designing a special school force an architect to completely rethink emotional architecture?
Well, because a special needs environment removes the illusion that a quote-unquote standardized building works for everyone.
It completely shatters that idea.
Exactly. You are suddenly forced to design for intense sensory processing differences, mobility challenges, and profound requirements for psychological safety.
I remember reading about the acoustics in her notes.
Right. Consider the acoustics alone. In a standard concrete hallway, the echo of footsteps can be a minor annoyance to a neurotypical brain. But to a child with sensory processing challenges,
It can feel overwhelming.
it can feel like a physical assault.
So the architect has to essentially design a building that acts as an active caregiver.
That's a perfect way to put it. You replace sharp, abrasive corners with organic curves, because organic shapes mimic nature and naturally lower human defense mechanisms.
Oh, I hadn't even thought of that.
And you manipulate natural light to soothe rather than overstimulate. The building itself must preemptively manage the child's nervous system.
Which leads perfectly into her third lens, which is the teacher me. She looks at educational spaces from the perspective of the adults managing the room.
Right, the guides.
She lists foundational schools like Curl Gurgon, APJ, and Mother's Pride. She is basically mapping out how these foundational buildings shape a child's emotions from the perspective of the guides, while also incorporating the viewpoints of parents.
Like her guests, Shikati and Puja from the living room.
Exactly, to understand what the adults need the building to provide to keep the kids safe.
Because the teacher cannot foster curiosity if the building is actively suppressing it.
Right.
If the classroom is dark, cramped, and poorly ventilated, the teacher spends half their energy just managing the low-level agitation the room creates in the students.
But wait, this brings up a huge contradiction for me, honestly.
Okay.
When we talk about school architecture in the real world, like public schools, private institutions, whatever, the priority is almost always standardization.
Very true.
We want efficiency, we want to fit the maximum number of desks in a grid, minimize construction costs, and make the long hallways incredibly easy to monitor.
Surveillance architecture.
Yeah, exactly. So if the building is truly the third teacher, aren't we accidentally teaching millions of kids to feel institutionalized? Like they are just inventory to be managed.
You have hit on the exact tension Koshish explores in her master's thesis. And her answer lies in how she integrates play.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Her notes explicitly question how recreational spaces have its own impact on psychological aspects of human safety and security.
Ah, so play equals safety.
Yes, she connects this directly to an inclusive community center, especially for old age and kids, noting that residences and schools require recreational elements to quote-unquote boost happiness.
But how does recreation actually combat the feeling of being institutionalized?
Because standardization prioritizes surveillance and control, right? But play prioritizes discovery and autonomy.
Oh, that's a brilliant distinction.
When an architect injects accessible recreational spaces, natural light, and areas designed purely for joy into a blueprint, they change the curriculum of the third teacher entirely.
So the building stops saying, fall in line.
Exactly. A rigid, highly policed hallway teaches a child they are a widget. But a space with fluid boundaries and areas for spontaneous play, that teaches a child that their happiness matters.
That they are valued.
Yes, it teaches them that they are valued and that it is safe to explore the world.
It's the profound difference between a building that demands fall in line and a building that warmly says, you belong here.
And that realization that spaces are in constant dialogue with us is exactly why Kashish cannot simply drop these heavy concepts in an audio series and just walk away.
Right.
She recognizes that she has to apply the principles of inclusive design to how she actually broadcasts her narrative.
I am so glad you brought that up because the way she is constructing Architects FM is fascinating. In her Edge episode teaser, she announces this massive structural shift.
The bi-weekly format.
Yeah, the series is moving to a bi-weekly format in her own voice. But she isn't leaving the off weeks blank, which I think is so cool.
No, she's trying something really innovative.
She explains that her quote-unquote virtual self will take over, utilizing AI-assisted conversations, guest voices, and technology to handle the heavy lifting.
Which is a bold move.
Right. At first, using AI sounded a bit disconnected to me, given how deeply human her work is.
I can see why you'd think that. It seems counterintuitive until you look at the mechanism of delegation.
What do you mean?
She isn't using technology to replace human connection. She is using it to automate the structural bridging. By letting AI handle the logistical framework of the off weeks, she fiercely protects her own mental bandwidth.
Oh, so she doesn't burn out like she was on the construction site.
Exactly. It frees her up to dive much deeper into neurodesign, emotional architecture, and the deeply human elements of her work.
So she's essentially building an automated commute hub so she can focus on building the sanctuary.
That is a perfect application of her own mixed land use theory. You hit the nail on the head.
And she is heavily bringing her community into this new build, too. Her notes mention adding voiceover from her longest friend because she really values that deep historical input.
Which just adds to the emotional architecture of the show itself.
Definitely. She is also teasing an upcoming conversation labeled The Iron Ladies. She promises her audience that this specific conversation will, and I quote, rearrange something in you.
I love that phrasing. She treats the audio series not as a polished, finished monument, but as an active construction site.
That's exactly it. She explicitly tells her listeners, find me in the DMs, tell me where you are in your construction. You're on this site too.
It's so inviting.
It really is. She is literally handing her audience a hard hat and asking them to help pour the foundation.
Which mirrors everything we've discussed today about emotional architecture.
How so?
Well, just as the physical walls of a living room require the right people, the right energy, and the right laughter to become a sacred space, her audio series requires the active, messy participation of her listeners to become a genuine community.
Oh, I see.
The audience themselves serve as the load-bearing walls of the show.
It is incredibly rare to see someone not just theorize about a concept, but actively live it out in real time through their medium. It's so impressive.
It really is a masterclass in applying theory to practice.
So when we step back and look at the entire blueprint we've unrolled today, we started with Kashish's reimagining of mixed land use.
Right, from dry maps to emotional zones.
We looked at how our daily journeys, those high-friction commutes through the metro, act as architectural airlocks that actively manipulate our nervous systems before we even reach the office.
And then we examined the invisible nature of emotional architecture. We saw how the grueling, unglamorous work of site coordination builds a structural reputation that actually offers shelter to others.
Yeah, the load-bearing wall of reputation.
Exactly. And we saw how the simple act of gathering trusted friends late at night can fundamentally alter the psychological dimensions of a living room.
And most powerfully, we unpacked the massive, almost intimidating responsibility of the third teacher. The undeniable fact that the standardized hallways, the placement of the windows, and the presence or absence of joy in a school's design are actively educating our children.
Day in and day out.
The buildings are teaching them their worth in the world.
The overarching lesson from Kashish's entire portfolio is that architecture is never passive. The environment is in a constant, relentless dialogue with our biology and our psychology.
The buildings are always speaking.
Always.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. Think back to that opening scenario, how a room can instantly make you feel exhausted or surprisingly safe.
Right. And ask yourself this. If your current living room, your office, or the route you take to get there, were a third teacher actively educating you every single day,
what exactly are they teaching you about how you value yourself?
it really is a profound question.
It is definitely something to carefully consider the next time you put your key in the front door.
The third teacher never left me a grade, never wrote feedback, never called anything a failure. It just kept teaching, kept making me feel something. It arranged the light in a certain way, made the staircase felt like a journey, put a window exactly where a child needed to look out and wonder. Maybe that's why we become architects, to build the third teacher for someone else. Today, I got to be the audience and sitting here listening back to my thoughts. यार ये resonate किया deeply. So yeah, I'll leave you with this. Which space was your third teacher? The one that made you feel alive, joyful, and fully present. Sit with that. Next Saturday, I will walk you through the schools I actually designed, spaces I entered not as a student, but as a teacher, as an architect, as the one who's now responsible for what the building teaches. And somewhere in that story, there's a detail I've never told anyone. This is Architects FM, एक सफर दिल्ली से दिल तक. Till next Saturday, same mic, same site. Keep layering, keep learning.